Good evening and welcome. I'm Chris Kleindienst, the lesbian who owns Left Bank Books in St. Louis, Missouri. A big thank you to Shane Mullen, the man behind the tech curtain tonight and the event coordinator and host for Left Bank Books for more than 200 author events annually online and recently back in person. He does an extraordinary job. So I'm thrilled to welcome back to the mostly St. Louis audience tonight's guest, Lucy Jane Bledsoe, as we celebrate her new novel, No Stopping Us Now. This event is made possible in part through support from our nonprofit arm, the Left Bank Books Foundation, and from you, the readers who purchase books from us, including books by the authors we bring to you. Left Bank Books is open for browsing both online and in-store with curbside pickup available as well. Our expanded in-store hours are 10 to 8 every day except Sunday when we're open 11 to 6. Don't forget, we will have time for questions, so drop them in the comments when you think of them, and we will incorporate them. Lucy Jane writes fiction for a variety of age levels, primarily about strong, interesting girls and women having adventures. Girls and women who are sometimes lesbians and are adventuring sometimes outside. Stories about girls and women who emerge as heroes, as you probably know if you've searched for them, have been nearly non-existent until relatively recently, especially if these stories take place in our world as opposed to an imaginary one. And I think that this is great, that we now have these stories and that Lucy Jane has contributed so many. She's written 16 works of fiction, I think, not including her even newer novel, which will come out next year, and which I hope we can talk about a little bit tonight. She's the recipient of several prestigious writing fellowships, including a Yaddo Fellowship and 2 National Science Foundation Artists and Writers Fellowships. Her writing has won a number of awards, including the Saturday Evening Post Great American Fiction Award, a Sherwood Anderson Foundation Fiction Award, and an American Library Association Stonewall Book Award. We're going to talk about No Stopping Us Now in detail in a moment, but I want to share my favorite blurb written by Alison Bechdel of Dykes to Watch Out For and Fun Home fame, and more recently, The Secret to Superhuman Strength. Here's what she says about No Stopping Us Now. From Shirley Chisholm and Gloria Steinem to macrame and hip huggers, we are solidly in 1974. Yet there's something absolutely contemporary in the way Bledsoe captures the perils, the highs, and the awkward nonverbal jostling of high school social life. No Stopping Us Now takes a historic moment for women's sports and replays it in all its sweaty, visceral glory. So welcome, Lucy Jane. It's great to have you back with us tonight.
I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shane. I love doing events with Left Banks because, as I've told Chris many times, it's my favorite fiction collection in the country. It's just a fabulous collection of fiction. So I always love being there in person to look. And Shane is one of the best behind the scenes tech producers of virtual events. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Here's that book again. I realized I didn't put it on my shelf behind me because I have no shelf. So here it is. There we go. So tell us, since I purposely did not sort of give a whole big description of the book in the intro because I kind of wanted you to set the stage for it. It's 1974, it's high school in Oregon, it's girls basketball. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I tend to write strictly from my imagination. I don't write too much autobiographical stuff, but it's my first real autobiographical novel. So most of the story is true, and we can talk a little later about why I fictionalized it and how I fictionalized it. But it's a story that I've literally taken 50 years to try to figure out how to write. It's what happened to me my junior and senior year in high school. Title IX passed in 1972, and I didn't know about it, but I desperately wanted to play basketball. So it's the story of how I made that happen and became an activist in the process. But it took me so long to write it because I couldn't figure out how to write it. I mean, I think I've written this. I've written a few essays and published them here and there, and I wrote it once as a screenplay, and then realized I don't know anything about the movie world. Why am I writing a screenplay? I wrote it as a stage play, and submitted it somewhere once, and then thought same thing. I can't. I'm busy writing fiction. I can't find a way to break into these other worlds. I think I wrote it as just about everything except poetry. And I finally realized what was stopping me was I really felt like I should write it as a nonfiction because the story arc is kind of amazing. And it's true. And why aren't I just writing it as nonfiction? So it took me a long time to find that answer. And once I had that answer, I could go ahead and write it as a novel. Also, it was a whole nother leap to figure out who I wanted to write it for. And I've never written YA. And I finally realized that what I wanted, the story is basically how I found my voice through team sports. And I wanted to talk to young women who are now the age I was then and have a conversation about gender and racial justice issues then and now. So from the 50-year divide.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool about that process of taking 50 years to find the right voice to tell the story of how you found your voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really appreciate that because I've taken 50 years to try and figure out how to write some stuff also, although I haven't gotten as far as you have, and your story is just sort of perfect. I thought maybe before we go more into that, let me just briefly, I think I have it here. So Title IX, which probably everybody watching knows, but just in case, was an amendment to the 1964 Civil Rights Law that added discrimination, making it illegal to discriminate against someone in education on the basis of sex. And it was signed into law in 1972 by President Nixon, but then it went through the whole process of having to get the interpretation of it and how the schools what were the rules, like what did it mean exactly. And there was a lot of fighting about, it kind of got reduced to sports because of course especially college football was so sacrosanct and such a big money maker in the schools that they felt quite threatened by having to share the spoils with women. So it took a while and went back and forth. But the original statute is no person in the United States shall, based on sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And it was actually that law was introduced into Congress by two women, a Hawaiian state representative, Patsy Mink, and an Oregon state representative, Edith Green.
Yeah.
And then, I'll just, as long as I'm talking about this right now, my connection to that is that my mother, as you know, Lucy, came to work for the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in the early 70s. And that's where they had a program called the Women's Action Program. And one of her first jobs was to actually write those regulations for Title IX that finally got accepted and codified in 1975. And they've been fought and changed back ever since, including right up to Trump and Biden. So our job here is not done, but it was life-changing. And that's what's so exciting to me about your book is that you're like the exact person, age, place, and time to immediately, fight for really the possible benefits of it. So how So your main character, Louisa, I feel, is you
Yeah.
in this book.
Yes, that's not a secret. Yeah.
And she's wonderful, and she's so passionate and very. She doesn't. It's almost like the education of Louisa, because she just wants to play ball. She doesn't, yet know, except maybe in the story she's going to learn about feminism and Gloria Steinem and eventually even Title IX. So she seems. I really like how she's just kind of pure in a way, like, and then how she
is another word.
Naive, well, innocent but not in that weird Renaissance art way, Can you talk more about like how you I feel like it's how you made your characters, and yet they're not really characters. You fictionalized your story.
Yeah. Well, partly I had to fictionalize. It's hard for me to write about myself, but yeah, and I just to speak a moment to the idea of her being innocent. A lot of people have told me, "Oh my gosh, you were so courageous. How'd you do that, 17?" I'm not being modest when I say it wasn't courage. It really was naivete. I thought, "Oh my gosh." I learned about this law, and I learned it in this amazing event. I was invited to speak with Gloria Steinem. And I learned about Title IX, and I thought, well, then, the law says I have a right to a basketball team. So I thought it was just kind of obvious, and that all I needed to do was tell people. Mm-hmm. And the blowback that I got from speaking the truth was so confusing for so many years. And I think that's another thing that kept me from writing this story for so long. And I'm only now, and this point in my life, understanding the source of that rage that basically these men had about a young girl speaking up, the same rage they have about people of color speaking up and women speaking up today. And it's not, it was hard for me to understand. It wasn't just about, I was asking for equal time on the court and an equal share of the school budget. There was something else that was driving their behavior. And that was very confusing for a 17-year-old kid. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I'm answering your question at this point, but so finding my way to telling that story had so many obstacles.
Yeah. So, in the book, Louisa, so her team is basically, you're practicing in the gym at like 6 a.m, because that's when nobody wants it. And you don't have anywhere to compete except in a city league that you have to get yourselves to. And you don't have uniforms. You don't have any school support whatsoever. It seems not even really any parental support or enthusiasm from how you tell the story, which isn't all that surprising. Right. It was so offhanded then. The thought that girls would be in athletics at all. I'm just a little bit older than you. And so, I know what high school was like around then. You could still sort of just get out of going to gym class if you said you had your period. And, we certainly, my only experience on a field was in marching band for the boys, football. So I'm wondering in the book that Louisa's mother is not all that supportive of her nascent feminism after she goes to speak sort of accidentally almost alongside Gloria Steinem. Was that how was that drawn from life? And that life?
Yeah. My mom, oh gosh, it's complex. All mothers are complex. Yeah, was a very bright woman who had a career. And then when she met my dad, it was just expected that she would not work. She had 5 kids. Of course, she loved us, but I don't think raising children was something she particularly enjoyed doing. I also know that she hated cooking and all of that stuff. So, would she be a feminist today? I don't know. I think she had a lot of resentment and even considered it selfishness, the way I lived my life when I would do what I wanted to do. She once told me I was selfish, and because I didn't want children, and because, she said something like, "You just do whatever you want to do, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, kind of," But that said, on the other side of it, we were a very political family, very involved in local politics, both my mom and dad. We spent, so much time down at the public schools, stuffing envelopes and working for school budgets. And so when I started doing this advocating for the city of Portland to be in compliance with Title IX, they were supportive. They were always afraid that I would lose something by stepping out or being too unfeminine or outspoken, or so it was this balance between, I even have this in the book. They show up. Just one little mention, but they show up at the school board meeting where I'm speaking, but they are afraid to sit up front, but they don't sit really in the back. So it's this balancing act, But my dad had a loyalty to him that was very extreme. And when the attacks started happening, and for those who haven't read the book, letters started flying all around the city between the school board and my principal in my high school and the athletic director at my high school, and basically calling me a liar. And it was hard to know what I was lying about, since I said I wanted a basketball team and there wasn't one. But in any case, that got my dad angry, and he really helped me write my responses that I delivered later in written form to the newspaper and to the school board. So, they were supportive, but it had sort of tension to it.
Sure. I think, a lot of women of our sort of expanded generation have that kind of experience with their mothers. Very, their mothers were really sort of ripped off,
Yeah.
And that's a very hard place to be, especially in the second half of the 20th century, where things were exploding, literally. And yeah. So you touched on the pushback you got, and here you are, this 17-year-old young woman, just asking to play basketball the same as the boys, your brothers, in fact, who were also athletic, right? That was part of the thing in the book, was just the sports, coaches and stuff were, all they could talk about was your brothers, who weren't there anymore. But you got that pushback, and literally physically from one coach, that had to have been I was just like enraged. It's a good thing it happened 50 years ago, or I would have gone in there and throttled him myself.
Yeah. I want to speak to both those points. Yeah. One about the brothers. I don't think I know a single person my age, and even among young women I'm talking to today, whose passion for sports and ability in sports, they can't point to brothers who included them and coached them. So, my brothers, especially the brother that's 2 years older than me, loves teaching, loved coaching. He taught me everything I knew about basketball and also baseball. As I didn't get a chance to play softball in my high school, but so my whole family was athletic. We'd in the summer go to these city track meets, and all 7 of us would pile in the car. And so without that family support, and especially from my brothers, I wouldn't have been able to have any skills to play basketball, because no one else was teaching us basketball.
Right.
So there's that. It's an interesting story. I try to show where the allies show up to, and that was just one form of allyship. But the blowback, was so intense. And so after I started speaking to the school board about the inequities in my high school, and we pointed to a lot of stuff. I actually went down to the Oregon State Legislature and spoke to the lawmakers there. The coaches in my high school, particularly the boys basketball coach, became infuriated. So did the athletic director at my high school. And I kept a scrapbook from that time. And let me read a couple quotes, because these are some of the letters, and I can show you the letters that went flying around about me and what I was doing. So this one is from the athletic director at my high school to my principal. And he, near the bottom of the letter, he writes, "Ms. Bledsoe's statement that male athletes are sanctioned and privileged and given exclusive rights to official facilities is totally and unequivocally preposterous and unfounded." Which is, I know. It's, I said we didn't get to use the gym and didn't have teams, but that was preposterous and unfounded. Here's another one of my favorites. It's from the same guy to my principal again. a little bit defensive. I sincerely believe that if Miss Bledsoe has any quarrel, a real letter, with the athletic program at Wilson High School, it should be directed more toward getting more girls involved than toward getting the athletic department involved. So when I went back and spoke to the school board, I asked them, how can more girls get involved in programs that don't exist? So,
right.
I'm going to read one more quote. This is one of my favorites. This is actually from the school board. No, I'm sorry. Yes, it's from the school board to my principal. And the whole letter is about how to deal with me, what my principal should be doing. The school board's telling me how they should deal with me. And throughout the entire letter, I'm only referred to as the girl. There is no name attached to me. And the last paragraph is just one sentence. And it says, my last suggestion to you would be that you refute the girl and defend your high school at the next meeting. So they were pretty upset.
Wow.
But that was the least of it. It got really scary when this boys basketball coach at my high school found me alone in a hallway one day, pushed me against the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and really told me if I didn't zip it, I would be sorry. And, you know, that was hard for me to unpack because I did just feel like I was asking for a fairness issue. The thing that's been interesting to me about it, because you mentioned if that happened today, I mean, oh my God. But in 1974, it didn't even occur to me to tell anyone. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell friends. I told nobody. I mean, it was so, I don't know, obvious or deeply ingrained in me that no one would believe me, or even more that he had the right to do that. You know, he had a right to tell me to shut up. And so he also told I had a good friend on the boys basketball team, and he told the whole boys team things and asked them to spread rumors, such as that I was a lesbian and that they should tell everyone in the high school. He was right, but I didn't know that at the time yet. And of course, that was a very derogatory thing to, spread about a 17-year-old girl. So, the attack was pretty intense.
That it is intense. I mean, at any decade, that's an intense attack. I mean, we would say now that he physically assaulted you and threatened you.
I could sue him under Title IX for sexual.
Yes, you could. So yeah, that was a particularly dark moment and utterly believable, because I didn't question at all that you had fabricated it for the book. It was like that. Oh my God, that's horrible. And you were very, you were kind of alone there. You were going into these meetings alone. I mean, maybe you were being driven and your family would come, but like you were like speaking, there was not, I thought about this. It's slightly different, but my high school went through a situation where it was advocating for to hire more African-American teachers and teach African-American history. And we actually did a student strike one day, and we demonstrated on the front steps along with the FBI. And but there was a group of students with some adult assistants, and we were learning how to organize. And you seemed like just this brave lone voice, which had to have been.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of alone. I mean, I didn't have other kids joining me. What I did have was some adults. And I actually, in an earlier draft, my agent was really interested in these older women who were working with me. I added a bunch of scenes with them, and then my editor wanted them taken out. So you know how that is.
Yeah.
But when I did this event with Gloria Steinem, and it was kind of cool how that happened. I was invited. I had tried to join, and again, I'm not sure why I did this. I don't remember feeling hot-headed, but I tried to join the Letterman's Club in my high school because I had lettered in tennis. That one of the handful of sports they had for girls. So I got my letter in tennis, and there was a Letterman's Club of students who had their letters, athletes. So I thought I should be in the club, but only boys could be in the club. So I tried to go to this meeting. I actually went to a meeting and sat there while the teacher advisor and the boys sat around and discussed whether or not I could be there. The main thing I remember is one of the boys saying, yeah, but like, what would we call the club? It's called the Lettermen's Club. So anyway, maybe that's what in the book I say, and I probably is what made the vice principal call me down to her office and tell me that Gloria Steinem was coming to town and wanted a representative on the stage with her. And I felt so, it wasn't until I wrote this book recently that I realized this was the vice principal we used to make a lot of fun of. And, oh my gosh, she hooked me up with Gloria Steinem. I mean, she was kind of cool, high school kids, you don't know. So again, I've lost track of what question I'm trying to answer. What was your question?
You were just I was talking about how you were kind of so on your own so much.
Yes, that's right. So I went and did this Gloria Steinem event, which is a whole nother story in itself. But some women came up to me afterwards and said, hey, do you want a basketball team, in the public schools? I said, yeah. And they go, well, we'll help you with that. So it was a group of older women, probably my mom's age, who were already doing things like testifying down at the legislature about sexist textbooks. And so in some ways I was their little pawn. I was their student, I continued being the student representative. So they were setting it up for me to go speak. So I didn't, and this isn't in the book, so maybe it makes me more courageous than I was, but they arranged for me to speak to the school board and down at the legislature and things like that.
I think that comes across in the book.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, I think it does, but they didn't. They were adults, and you were kind of, I know what it's like to be the odd girl out at school, and that. In some ways, you were also speaking for your team, which for whatever reasons, they weren't like going to be showing up like your posse on the stage behind you or something. but it felt like they had your back, but it was just still like, I could just imagine the kind of the doubt, and the second guessing yourself, and just what it's like to come into school and be public enemy number one to the power structure of the school, and seemingly half the student body. That's a lot.
Well, and I was used to being a good girl, it's like I was a good student and student body, politics and senior class president. And, I was used to kind of doing that kind of stuff, probably too much of a good girl. So, but it didn't stop me, the pushback. I mean, I don't know why not. I think, again, it's a naivete. I was just the fairness issue. I was, since I was very, very, very little, a, big feminist, and I wouldn't stop. Yeah.
I think that pure, this is not fair, is such a great beginning to so much that needs to happen in the world, the correctives. I want to talk a little bit about your actual characters and just the process, because obviously we're saying this is definitely drawn pretty much directly from how it happened, and the people are real. And how was that like? I love this book. You've written it for young adult, so it's careful in a lot of ways, but it's also just so readable for anyone. I really enjoyed it, and I felt it was really authentic and fresh, and I was there the way Alison Bechtel describes. It's like, I lived through that time, and you were getting all these details so wonderfully, but you're also getting that like innocence, sort of just the awakening really well, and how, but the characters themselves, the friendships, the things that were happening with the rest of the characters in the book was just really wonderfully done. They all had, full personalities. They were really interesting. I got really invested in all of them. Can you talk about them a little bit?
I can, and I will say that all the adult characters are pretty much non-fictional. It's the kid characters that I fictionalized a little more, partly to protect people's privacy. I didn't want to just tell the stories of kids, young people out in the world who are adults today. So, and I also drew some of my experiences from a year or two later, like my first 2 years in college, into the story. military and being on basketball teams then. That said, all of these experiences I had with these, as the character Louisa, with these other young people I certainly had. I mean, I did have a boyfriend who had a broken arm who I tried to have sex with, you know, so all those were true. And yeah, so I you know, and there is the, yeah, it's almost like I didn't want to out certain friends of mine when I was a child. So I did sort of change up who they were. The thing about the 70s details was really fun because my editor, after the book was sold and done, really wanted me to bring in a little bit more of the 70s into the story. And I was glad she asked me to, because that was a good idea. And so first I tried to do it from memory. Then I just did a Facebook thing. I said, you know, tell me all your details from the 70s that you really remember, specifically 74 and 75. And it was really interesting because I got all this stuff from the 60s and people didn't know they were quoting the 60s. And it just brought home how important it is to not just rely on your memory. You know, they'd tell me some certain kind of pants or shoes or a dance, and I'd look it up and it would be like 1965. So then I had to shift gears and I started doing things like I watched a lot of Soul Train, which was really cool. Get outfits. Like I put a couple of my characters in outfits I found on dancers on Soul Train. I watched All in the Family, which was exactly that era. And just looked back at some old TV stuff from that time.
That's a great idea.
To dress those characters and to give them their dance moves. The emotional content, and thank you for noticing that. I've gotten that comment a lot, that I captured that 17-year-old emotional state. And that I'm afraid I'm just trapped at 17. So I didn't know that. That wasn't hard for me to remember that. And that's all, you know, that's the emotional states, which is the heart of most novels, is completely nonfiction. I mean, that's just how I felt about my friends and moving through those couple of years.
Mm-hmm. It felt really authentic. I didn't really think there was anything in it where it's just like you kind of had to squeeze something in a box to keep the story going. It's just like, yeah, everybody just really worked for me. And I really love them all. And that makes me, what you said just now, I wanted to come back to something we were talking about earlier in the green room. That you have, you know, since the book has been out and you've been doing some readings in different places, that you've been actually talking to folks who are that age, 17-year-olds, high school students. And can you talk about what that's like, what kind of stuff you've been experiencing with them?
Yeah, it's been amazing. Once I realized I wanted to write this as YA because I wanted to have conversations with young people. And it was a two-way conversation I wanted to have. I know a lot of people in our generation feel frustrated that young people don't know the feminist history. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's been true over and over and over again. That's because our history isn't taught. And, you know, young people have to remake everything over and over and over again. So to share some of this history, and also, you know, we all know young people who sort of look at you and don't realize that there's a lot of similarities between us. So I wanted to share that way, but I also wanted to share the other way, because I do have a number of 17-year-old friends in my life, and I know they see things very differently, and I wanted to hear about that. Mm-hmm. You know, just even how young feminists dress. You know, I have 17-year-old friends trying to explain to me what that means to them, and how it's just very different than how we felt about so many things. So I just wanted to have that two-way conversation. I think it would be so helpful if we could, we have so much work to do and so far to go in bringing both gender and racial justice. And the more we can talk to each other rather than be in our separate, in this case, generations, the better. So I have invited in 3 different events so far, 17-year-olds to join me in conversation like you and I, except it was
great.
You know, it's been fabulous. I mean, I just love hearing what they have to say. And a lot of it's been shocking to me. Things are not going well in high school in terms of sexual harassment and abuse. I mean, one of my 17-year-old friends just calls it flat out rape culture.
Oh my God.
And I believe her. I'm hearing that from a lot of young women, how horrific things are and how poorly the administrations and teachers are handling it, i.e. they're not handling it. They're afraid of litigation. They're afraid of, they have excuses like, well, if we all just work it out among ourselves, it'll be worked out. Either they're afraid of parents, they're afraid of lawsuits. So it's rough for young women out there right now, as rough as it was for us. And one last comment about the intergenerational thing. I have one young friend who I've known for quite a while. I've known since she was born, and she's 17. And I wanted her to read the book, and I gave her a copy, and I had the sense she wasn't reading it, and then she did. And literally the next time we hung out, I felt like she was looking at me differently, like, understand. That there's more than just this old adult here,
Right.
So
Right.
loved that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's really not surprising. I mean, like, that's what I'm understanding, is that school is just as rough as ever. Even if some of the structural ways it's enforced have changed, like the idea of fear of lawsuit. I mean, there would never be any fear of a lawsuit. That's why that coach could do what he did to you back then, is that there wasn't even a thought, but still, in essence, the same things are continuing to happen. Which is terrible. What I was going to say is that your book will have, I think, what we call in the industry a long tail, which means that, right now it's first month out of the chute, and, it's going to be new for a year, and then it settles into what we call backlist, right? But because of what it is, and because it's so important, and really, even though history very fresh, students reading it and discussing it seems very important and likely. It could be a very useful book in schools where they don't figure out to ban it first. Yeah. Which is sort of the second piece of that. It's like, this is such a great handbook, I think, for young people about speaking truth to power. And right now they really need that. They need our support, but they need to know that they can do it, that you can say no to something that's unacceptable as a student in your school. Like, you have a voice. Yeah. And at least for a little while longer, it's mostly protected by the First Amendment. Hurry up.
I mean, it's scary that after what was happening with Roe v. Wade, I wonder if they're going to try to roll back Title IX. I mean, they will try to roll back anything they can.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's even more important. But I do think it's a great tool. Your book is a wonderful novel. It's a piece of art, and it does something that a lot of good art, it's like should do. And so I think, really hope that we can get it into hands of young adults, the YA audience, as much as possible. And I hope we can get it into school libraries. And I don't want to put it on the list of books we're currently giving away at the bookstore with this project we have, read the Literacy and Justice Project for the banned books here in the area, which include, queer books, Alison Bechdel, of course. But I have a feeling you'll get on that list. It'll be a dubious distinction. In the meantime, I want to get it through the doors as much as possible. Possible.
Yeah.
Can you talk? And I want some folks to have some questions here. I know that there's back and forth going on in the comment field, but somebody certainly has something or even a memory to share of their own experiences of being a young woman into sports or just anything of that nature. But I sort of intimated in my intro that you're one of these women who's written about, girl and women heroes in adventure stories, which I just have a thing of, I missed that, I missed that growing up, and I still find it hard. Whenever I find one, it's just so exciting to me. Where the whole point isn't being sexually assaulted and ultimately rescued. That's not the adventure. So you mentioned your family is very involved. They go out to track events and outdoors people. But you've been to Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
You've been to all. Is it 3 stations? Like not everybody. That's a real distinction.
Stations, yeah.
So why? Let's talk about what is your and you write about these things are incorporated in your novels. These are places that you go to in your novels. So what can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think one of the things my partner who's listening in will laugh because she's heard me say this so many times, and maybe other audience members have. But one thing that I love most thinking about human beings and characters is how we are a species, an animal species. And I feel like human beings don't recognize that enough. So I love, love, love writing about our relationship to landscape and environment. And when I think about a character and what's motivating her or making her act in certain ways, I often go back to, her very biological self, because I think most of us are actually operating from that place more than we allow. We get psychology sometimes is this big sort of thing we put over everything to make explanations, but we're actually just these animals out there trying to get, food, sex, and sleep, So, and so Antarctica is the most extreme environment. So when you put human beings in somewhere that extreme, you really just like squeeze them down to their essence, which is just interesting to me to see who human beings are at their very essence when they're really pushed to the test. And exactly like you say, yes, we can be pushed to the test by murder and sexual assault and those kind of things. But I most enjoy thinking about how we're pushed to the test in some other ways, just because those stories, they need to be told, and they can be told well, but they're told all the time. So that, and I just have to throw in too, that for Antarctica, what keeps me going as a person, keeps me rising above depression and all those things is beauty, natural beauty, natural made beauty. Art sustains me so much, but Antarctica is such a spectacularly gorgeous place. So to be there and see that beauty just, holds me and continues to hold me long after I've been there.
One doesn't just, buy a plane ticket to Antarctica. Isn't it a process to even be allowed to go there?
It is. I mean, one can buy a tour trip, and I think they start at about $20,000. It's extraordinarily expensive. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I read a book by a woman who got this grant from the National Science Foundation. I hadn't heard of the grant until I read this book by this woman who had gotten it.
I read that book too. I can't remember either.
Sarah Wheeler.
Okay. Yeah.
So I read that book and I thought, I want this more than I've ever wanted anything in my life. I'm going to Antarctica. I'm going to get this grant. So, I won't tell you now all the steps. I've applied for things, I've gotten things, but I went all out on this. I did everything I could think of to make this the best application I could possibly make it. I made a little deal with myself. I was bicycling a lot at the time. I don't know. I guess this is silly, but anytime I saw a coin on the ground, no matter where I was, I had to stop and pick up that coin and keep it as part of my deal with myself about how I was going to get this grant. So I got it. So I got to go. And the National Science Foundation pays for your entire trip, your clothing, your airfare, everything is paid for. And you go there and you stay. My first time, I think I stayed 4 months. And they give you a place to live and work, and you just spend the whole time. Their goal, and I appreciate them for this, is they want not just people to know about the science. They do want people to know about the science that's happening, but they have this vision that artists might be able to share what's happening with that science, including climate change, better than, say, a journalist might be able to. So they want you to come back and share what you've learned. And some, choreographers have gone, photographers have gone, lots of writers, but all kinds of different artists have gone on this program. And I got it twice. I got to go twice. And then the third time I went, because I'd had this experience, I don't know, it was the strangest thing. An Australian group asked me to come and be a speaker on the ship. So it was an Australian tour group, but the ship was a Russian.
The Russian ship.
Yes, a 1960s Russian spy ship, literally. So the entire crew was Russian, spoke only Russian. And I thought, I don't know. But I said, well, I'll do it if my partner Pat can come, because she had never gotten to see Antarctica. And they said, okay. So we had a blast. It was a fantastic.
Wow. A true vacation on a Russian spy ship.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
There's kind of a locked room mystery in there somewhere.
There is. I know. Especially now. I know.
So let me check here. Here we go. There's been a back and forth. I wasn't sure quite if there was a question in there, except, and maybe you can just address this briefly. Will this book or are any of your other books available in audio?
I think this book is available in audio. I'm sorry that I should be able to answer that for sure.
I don't know that it is showing up now yet.
My editor said she's working on that.
Okay.
It's electronically, it's available. That's what I was thinking of.
Oh, ebook. Okay.
And I do, yes, yeah. And I do have a number of books that are available on audio, but I can't cite you which ones right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to read something outside of a basketball theme, they can check out your other work.
Basketball themed.
Which, by the way, before I forget, because I did almost forget, I want to say I am not a person who turns on the game and watches basketball religiously and screams at the television. I enjoy it, occasionally. But I thoroughly enjoyed your literal play-by-play parts of this book. You write basketball action really well. Somebody says, I'm not into basketball. It really wouldn't matter here. I mean, you would get into the excitement of it because you write it well.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I'm very aware that, people say, I'm not interested in sports stories. And I try to convince them, if I get a chance to, that it's not a sports story. I'm always writing about the emotional drama among the characters. So even when I write a basketball scene where they're playing ball, and there's not many of those in there because that I think can be boring. But when there is a basketball scene, it's really about the interplay among the characters as opposed to, will they win the game? So.
Yeah, it definitely made perfect sense in the storyline every time you wound up on a court there. Yeah. So Elaine writes that this book is so right on about things that happened during the beginning of the Title IX era. Everything in the book was amazing. I especially enjoyed the basketball coaches. The coach that really coached the team was perfect. And so was the boys coach who wanted to take over. In fact, unfortunately, once girls/women's sports started getting popular and teams were successful, some of those men took over and pushed out the coaches that really cared. Elaine has a educator background, high school, and so she knows some of what she speaks of, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for making that point, Elaine. And it's so true. What's happened was all the coaches for women's teams were women. And then once Title IX grew basketball to the extent it has, there's still all kinds of discrepancies and inequities. But once it grew it and there was actually some money there, the men came in and started taking all the jobs. And that's been a big problem. I think it's starting to move back the other way. What's kind of exciting for me, because I do follow women's college basketball. Dawn Staley, Tara Vanderveer, some of the best coaches now are women, and I like to see them win, and they are. Yeah.
Elaine agrees with you about the coaches.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. And that the women's soccer is now going to be paid equally to men's, which
is amazing. That just yeah.
And I kind of got to say, leave it to a lesbian, because would it ever have happened without No,
this is Pat and I walk around the house, and practically every day we say, do we have to do everything?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being Yes.
There was a little news piece about it, just a mention yesterday on the business program that runs on NPR, and Kai Ryssdal said that he actually thought that women should be paid more because they were actually better.
Well, they win national championships and the men don't. I mean,
correct.
Yes, they're winning that way. They absolutely would be paid more. Yes.
You will know maybe what this means, Kim Mulkey.
Yeah.
I'm
not reading the comments. Should I be reading?
Oh, this is a different person, not Elaine, but a basketball fan who's been commenting about.
She's just she's naming another great coach, I think.
Yes.
Okay, so, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got our watchers are not question askers tonight.
I'm looking, despite Shane telling me, our tech coordinator, not to look at the comments because I'll get distracted. I am having to look at them, and thank you for all these comments, everyone. They're wonderful. Yeah. I have a question for you, Chris, if we have time. I'm wondering how it affected you when you were young, watching your mother do this Title IX work.
Well, interestingly enough, mostly, and I think that this might be true of other people who've had, in my case, a mother who's especially a mother, but who's like involved in changing the world in some bigger way. They're never home. So, I sort of raised myself while she went off and made it possible for so many other people to have better lives. And I was enormously proud of her. I didn't know at the time she was working on it. What's interesting about her, and what is probably partially why it's so hard to find, I can't like Google her. Of course, it was way before anything would wind up on the internet. But she just seemed to do the work that needed to be done in her view. She had such a big sense of justice, and she had gone east to start. She worked for a consulting firm that was doing stuff around, post Martin Luther King assassination, post, like starting community centers and health clinics in inner cities and stuff like that. So when she moved into a federal government position and wound up in this, reporting directly to the director of health, education, and welfare, which is now, health and human services and education, two separate departments. Wow. But it was one thing then. And she was, I knew she was doing hero work, but she didn't talk about it too much when I would come to visit, because I was already out of high school by then, and she was on the East Coast and I was still in St. Louis. She was also involved in the Northern Virginia Now chapter. She was the president of that for a while, and she was very active in trying to get the ERA finally passed. So generally I would come and there would be a whole living room full of women, making posters and strategizing about that. So, it's like, where do I rest my eyes? I mean, she was very busy, and I was so proud of her. And I feel like in some ways, the big thing has been, how do I live up to that? How in the world do I possibly live up to that? And also just like honor her, because she didn't really ask for the limelight. She just did the work.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, there's a book, I don't know if you have it in your store yet, called 37 Words by Sherry Boshart. And it's for adults. It's a great big history of Title IX. It's quite wonderful. But by reading it, it taught me just what you're saying. I mean, the number of women out there who are doing the work like your mother, thousands of them. And that's what got it done. And that's what we need to be able to keep doing. I mean, people just quietly taking their piece of the community and pushing forward that bit that they needed to do, just like your mom. And she tells that story really, really well in that book.
I had forgotten about that book, and I will look at it. are reminding me that one of the things I wanted to point out was exactly that, how yes, that law, got passed, and then there was a bunch of finagling and almost immediately and continuously to this day trying to derail it with lots of changes. But in the meantime, it took like somebody saying, hey, I want to do this thing, and look, there's a law that everyone is ignoring. Like it's not just change isn't just a snap of the finger. You can't just fix it by passing a law, but you can certainly give people tools, but people have to pick up those tools and use them
and realize there's going to be fierce resistance.
Yeah, exactly. It sort of reminds me of that phrase, you can't legislate morality. You can pass a law, but then people are like, wait a minute. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be fair.
I don't want to give anything up of what I have.
Right. Because somehow you having something means I have to share, which is kind of, zero sum is not exactly the only way of looking at life.
That is the truth. Yeah.
But this is timely then also in that way too, because the book not only just, as I said, helping maybe some high school students with the struggles they're facing now, but still this one, we got, I think this is a huge step with women's soccer, but they're still trying to dismantle this law in so many ways. And as we were discussing, the Roe v. Wade thing could have so much of a, snowball effect. So,
yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I don't know if you've been following the Brittany Griner story.
Yes.
But I'm so worried about her. And that's all about the inequity in sport. I mean, she, like so many other basketball players, have had to go play overseas in Russia because they're paid so little here compared to the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
and if people don't know, she's currently in jail on a pretty trumped up charge now for months in Russia with the U.S. government support to deal with her has been very little until just recently. They've been working with other kind of prisoner release things, but treating the Black lesbian basketball player is not essential or important. I've been following.
Yeah, that's been upsetting.
So there's always work. So we are at time. I don't know if anybody wants to. We've got the links to books in the chat here, and some folks. I hope if you haven't ordered this book from us, you should. If you teach school, talk to me. I'll give you a deal on a bunch. That's what we do. It's important. And I don't know where you go next in the world, but with your tour.
I'm actually going to New York next weekend and doing an event with Alison Bechtel. So that'll be fun.
Oh.
Yeah. We're doing an in-person live event. So cross your fingers about COVID.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, travel safe, and I know that's going to be a blast.
I think so. And this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
And thank you, Shane.
Thank you, Shane.